Hello and welcome back to Logan Sounds Off. Today I'm excited to be having a conversation with an amazing solo musician, member of Automatic Lamini, already messed it up 5 minutes into the interview, as well as a longtime collaborator of PJ Harvey, John Parish. John, how are you keeping?
I'm keeping fine, thanks, Logan. Thanks for having me.
No problem. The pleasure is all mine, John, and I can't wait to chat to you about your career. But before we do get into that, I would like to ask you, for those who don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm a musician, songwriter, producer. I guess I'm best known for the work that I've done with PJ Harvey. I mean, we've worked together actually since the late 1980s. Polly was a member of my band Automatic Lamini before when she was basically as soon as she left school. And then shortly after that, she started her PJ Harvey trio, the fantastic PJ Harvey trio, and then on her third album, To Bring You My Love, I got back involved and worked as a co-producer with herself and Flood, and have been involved in pretty much every record bar two that she's done since then, and I've been playing live with her, you know, on and off since 1995. Obviously, I produce other people as well. Most recently, I've done a few records with the New Zealand singer Aldous Harding. I also worked with a band called Dry Cleaning. I've worked with the American band EELS on a couple of records, and I also toured with them in the early 2000s, which was great. And well, too many people to mention.
Yeah, there's a lot there, guys. And if you want to check out my interview, Mark Oliver Everett, aka E of, as you mentioned there, EELS, definitely check it out in the description. We had a great chat. But after you listen to this conversation here, and just starting off with the beginning, obviously, I love listening to your work with PJ Harvey because I was trying to explain it to a friend actually today. He was going, "What kind of music does PJ Harvey play?" Because he didn't know her music, and I said it's hard to explain because there's so many different genres and it's so cool. And especially with your work, it's really multi-genre. So I'm curious to hear about when you were younger, kind of in those fundamental years growing up. What was on the radio? What were your parents listening to that was in your house that was inspiring you when you were that age?
Well, when I was a kid, when I was growing up, my parents just used to listen to opera and classical stuff like that, which was fine. That's what I thought music was when I was a kid, and I started off learning piano and on sort of classical piano. It didn't particularly speak to me. I just kind of did it because that's what I was doing. But then I discovered pop music just through Top of the Pops, like kind of everybody else in my generation, and particularly T Rex. That was the band that grabbed me, and I still love them, And but there were a number of other people, around about that time. David Bowie was just becoming really successful, so I was a big fan of his, and so I was listening to that kind of thing, and the people my friends at school were listening to the same kind of bands. Roxy Music, they just started. They seemed really cool. So it was kind of that kind of glam, I guess glam stuff, for want of a better word, though that doesn't really do it justice because I think that there was those early Roxy Music albums and all of David Bowie's 1970s albums stand up really, really well today. They're still some of my favorite records.
Yeah, they're really, really. It's so interesting though when I get to speak to for example, these incredible people who make really awesome music, it always comes back to like T-Rex and David Bowie and all these fantastic artists. They really were once in a generation musicians. And obviously you are too, because I know you don't only play with the guitar, you also play the accordion, the keyboards, you play the drums, the xylophone, and trombone. So you mentioned there you learned piano growing up. What other instruments, if you did learn, what were you learning growing up?
After piano, I did when I was about 11. I started trombone, but I just did that for a couple of years when I was at school. And I'm a really terrible trombone player, so I still I enjoy it. Um, I started playing drums when I was like 12 or 13, and that became my main instrument. And that was what I assumed I was going to be. That was my ambition at, 14, 15, was to become a drummer in a rock band. That's what I assumed I would do. And when I left school, that's what I started doing. So I was playing in a band with my friends from school. That kind of fell apart, and so I auditioned for a couple of bands that were advertising in the back of the NME, and joined a band called Thieves Like Us. I guess I was 19 at that time, and we went on tour. They were playing quite a lot of shows. Got a record deal. Went into a studio, which I'd never done any recording before, so it was kind of really exciting for me. And and even in that first session, when I was first working in the studio, I was interested in what was going on in the studio. A lot of the other people in the band would kind of do their bits and then head off down to the pub. But I would sort of hang around and kind of ask questions. What does that do? What would it be like if we put a tambourine on this? So I was kind of interested in how a record was put together, and I suppose that was really how I started to take an interest in production, and those early producers I was working with, Mark Wallace, Steve James, and then later on a guy called Richard Mazda, who was an absolutely enormous influence on me as a producer. They really sort of, yeah, just showed me how records were put together, and that was that. I guess that set me on the journey as a producer in parallel to being a musician.
And that's really, really interesting. And I'm actually going to be getting into that because I was about to ask you about these like us. So it's cool, kind of. Thank you for that segue. It makes my job so much easier. But we'll be getting into your production in a couple of minutes because it's really interesting. Um, your career as a producer. But before we get into that, I'd love to speak to you just about after Thieves Like Us, you started the group Headless Horseman, which soon became, and I'm going to get it right this time, Automatic Lamini.
Perfect.
Brilliant. That you founded with Rob Ellis.
Mm.
So, how did that partnership come about? Was it kind of a natural thing, or did you kind of seek out looking to start up a band?
Well, I guess when Thieves Like Us, I mean, I was the drummer in Thieves Like Us, but I was also playing guitar by that time and writing songs. So I was contributing songs to that band. And when that band fell apart due to sort of record company problems, personal problems, all the normal things that break bands up, I thought, okay, I'm going to start my own band, and this time I'm going to be the singer and play guitar. So I needed a drummer, and I met Rob Ellis because he was working in a record store in Yeovil, the sort of town where I grew up. Near where me, Polly, Rob, a lot of people I still work with grew up around this town. And I'd met Rob in the record shop, and we got along. And he'd said he was a drummer, and so I was well, I'm looking for a drummer. That I like that guy who works in the record shop seems like a nice guy. Let's see how we get on. And so we started playing together. So he was in the Headless Horseman as well. And then which was a more conventional kind of post-punk, guitar three-piece. And at some point during the sort of the 18 months or so that the Headless Horseman was together, I wrote a song that just had, instead of guitar, bass, and drums, I thought, oh, I'm gonna try one with Rob playing drums, me playing percussion, and just have a bass guitar in there, and me and Rob will sing harmonies and see if that works as a format. And that song immediately seemed to sort of, immediately sounded interesting and different. No, like didn't sound like anybody else, and it got such a strong reaction from sort of the crowds, or like I said, crowds, the small audiences that we were playing to at that time, and and then when the bass player from the Headless Horseman left, me and Rob thought, okay, let's start a new band where all the songs are going to be with this just bass, percussion, and drums format. and that was how Automatic Lamini came into being.
That's really, really cool. And it brought that band brought you to some serious places. One of them being you spoke in your introduction being a longtime collaborator of PJ Harvey, starting off in the 80s. And I just love to travel back to that because I was listening to Speaking with PJ on a podcast, a Broken Record podcast, which for anybody who is listening, I would strongly recommend that. Rick Rubin's on it and everything. Links will be down below. But you were on that podcast and you were mentioning how it was such really lovely beginnings, just PJ giving you some um demo cassettes and it kind of just went on from there. It grew and grew. Could you bring us back to that time of the first time you met Polly?
Yeah, well, okay. Automatic Lamini had been going for a little while by the time we'd met, and so we'd made a couple of records, couple of singles and an album. I think before I met Polly. Um, I think I initially met her because the guitar player from Automatic Lamini, Jeremy Hogg, had gone to a party with a sort of mutual friend of ours, and Polly was at the party, and she was sitting around playing guitar. And he came back from the party and just said, "Oh, I met this girl. She had a really nice voice. She was playing guitar." And I was like, "Okay, I'm going to kind of file that away because I appreciated Jeremy's taste. So I thought if he said that person's good, then I think she's probably going to be worth checking out." And so that was the first time I heard the name, and then shortly after that, she started coming to see Automatic Lamini shows at small clubs and things around, in Somerset and near Bristol, and I can't remember exactly how we were introduced, whether Jeremy introduced us or whether she just came up, but she started giving me cassettes of the songs she was writing, and she was 17 at the time, so they were quite sort of naive, folky, acoustic guitar songs. But there was something about her voice, even at that age, that was really. She didn't sound like a 17-year-old singer. She sounded like she could be 50 or something like that. There was an amazing maturity to the voice and a really
I was
incredible.
just thinking that in my head, like when you said that. I just thought really mature voice.
Yeah, it really struck me, and so I just thought, oh, this really something about this person, and we got on, we hit it off, we got on well, and so I just sort of said, when she was still at school, said when you leave school, if you want to join the band, that would be great, and so that's what happened.
And from there, an amazing journey began, which I'm going to actually park for a couple of minutes because I found this really, really interesting. So, after Automatic Lamini kind of broke up and stopped playing, you began lecturing at college. And I just wanted to ask you about that experience because you went from playing music and producing music and being a big part of kind of nearly the music performance to then teaching music and nearly bringing new musicians into the scene. How did you find lecturing? Did you find it came very naturally because you loved music, or did you find it was very difficult as it was a very big change of pace for you?
You know what? It wasn't such a big change of pace because I'd kind of because throughout Automatic Lamini, I was never really making, was never making a living from Automatic Lamini. So I had to find other ways of paying the rent basically, and so I always taught guitar and drums at at schools or privately. Just I would put an advert up in the post office saying drum lessons, whatever. So I always had pupils. So I was always teaching as a way of making money. And when I was at schools, they would often, because they realized, oh, John can play a few different instruments and he's in a band, and maybe he could do some kind of a rock workshop for the kids, so to not just individual like guitar, learning how to play, whatever people wanted to play, At the time, it was always "Eye of the Tiger." It seemed to me that was the one, the song everybody wanted to learn there. Now it's probably Seven Nation Army and has been for ages, which is much better. But um, so I
Bit
taught.
controversial there.
could be some people here. Um, so, um, so I was teaching groups of people anyway, so it wasn't like a big step up. And and when Yeovil College, I mean, one of the places I was teaching students was at Yeovil College, and the head of the music department at the time sort of thought, oh, it would be interesting if we actually ran a course in sort of in contemporary music. And so he said to me, why don't you write a course of what you would like to learn if you were a student, and then I'll turn it into academic language and we'll present it to the college, see if they want to run it. So we did that. They didn't want to run it at the time, but like about
Oh.
about 2 years later, they start all this kind of the whole idea of having performing arts courses at FE colleges, further education colleges, started to take hold, and somebody remembered that me and this other guy had written this course, and they realized, oh, this would be a good this would fit the program of the performing arts course. So they got in touch with me and asked if I would teach on it, and so that was kind of how I ended up becoming a lecturer, and I did that for 3 years, and I really enjoyed it, working with a lot of great students, and it was a really good learning thing for me because I had to work often with groups of people with really varying ability. So some of the musicians would be great, and some of them would be non musicians because they were on a performing arts course. So they would be doing acting, but they had to do a music module, so they couldn't play anything. But I would have to find like some way of making music with a group of say 15 people with different abilities. Maybe 7 of them play guitar, 2 of them played keyboards. If I was lucky, there would be a drummer, but often I would end up being the drummer, and and then a few singers, and I'd find a way of making a piece of music with those really odd combinations of instruments, and that later on really fed into some of the instrumental music that I wrote, because I realized you can kind of make really interesting things with some very simple components if you find a good way of putting them together. And it was really, it really helped me with hone my arrangement skills. So it was great to teach, but I really learned a lot from it too.
Yeah, I can totally understand how you would, especially with your career uh, as a musician who also makes soundtracks. And I loved hearing some of your soundtracks, especially She a Chinese, because it was so kind of atmospheric and really well arranged. That it, what I love about your music is it's not a ton of instruments playing small amounts. It's a small amount of instrument playing different kind of parts, but it's just really, really interesting. And with kind of while we're on the topic of making sound and making things sound a certain way, this is a class segue now for me. 1995 was a big year for you, Flood, and PJ Harvey because you co-produced with Flood and obviously PJ Harvey made To Bring You My Love. So, how did you find not only co-producing with Polly, but also how did you find working with Flood? Could you tell us when you first met him and what was it like working with him in the studio?
Absolutely, I remember really clearly the first time I met Flood. It was at Polly's house. Um, I mean, initially, it wasn't. I wasn't. I don't know if I was even going to be involved in the making of "To Bring You My Love." It came about because Polly had asked me to write an album's worth of music that she could put words to, which ended up being the Dancehall at Last Point record. And so I sort of said, yeah, of course, I would love to do that, definitely do it. Um, but I might need to take some time off college, to in order to write and record this. So I'm gonna need to be employed, as it were, by PJ Harvey Inc. And so she said, "Yeah, well, that's cool. But if in that case, why don't you come and make help me with my new record as well, which was To Bring You My Love." So it's like, okay, sure, that sounds good. So and it started off kind of just me and Polly working on things, and then she said, "Well, it's going to be produced by this guy Flood." Now I knew who Flood was because I knew he'd produced. Well, I knew the Nick Cave stuff he'd done, the Bad Seeds records, and I really liked. I really particularly liked the drum sound on them. It had always really stood out to me. So I was like, wow, this is really exciting. And so I remember him coming down to Polly's house, and we just sort of chatting and sort of listening to music, and just immediately liking him. And when we started working on the album, it was actually Flood who decided that I should get a co-production credit because we were sort of halfway through working on it, and obviously we all realised I'd been there every day since the beginning and was contributing. I suppose was contributing as much as anybody else. And at one point, Fletcher said, really, we should we should give John a co-production credit, which was really generous of him, and it made a massive difference, obviously, to well, it kickstarted my career. I mean, I'd already produced a lot of small indie singles and things from the sort of late 80s onwards, but this became the first internationally successful record that had my name on as a producer, and that opened a lot of doors to me. So I'm extremely thankful for Flood for stepping up and giving me that opportunity because he was really responsible for that.
That's really, really cool. And I actually spoke to a band um recently, the Murder Capital, and Flood worked on one of their records. And that was actually, and I know, look, guys, I don't know everything in the music industry, but this was shocking. This was the first time I heard of Flood. And
Right.
like from then on, it's kind of been like I've been noticing him everywhere now, going, oh, he worked on that and that and that and that. That I'm kind of going, geez, I'd love to speak to him one day. And then as well, you mentioned their dance hall at Louse Point, which I listened to quite recently. And that is a fantastic record. So I just want to say that to you. First of all, fantastic record. And also, um, working with PJ with an album, how did you find then? How did that come about? Kind of organizing with Polly. Oh, do you want to do a collaborative record? What was how did that journey begin?
I mean, that journey began as part of my Yeovil College career, my teaching career, because we did one of the shows that we did while I was teaching there, while I was lecturing, was a production of Hamlet, and the director wanted me to write some music as part to go with the production. He said, "I want it to be, write whatever you want. It can be, as short or as long the piece is, whatever at the instrumentation." And for me, this was massively freeing because I tended to always write for a band. So, you have, okay, this is the lineup, and it's going to be these kind of songs. Whereas suddenly it's like, oh, I could write a piece that's 10 seconds long or 15 seconds long, or I could write something that's 6 or 7 minutes long because there's going to be dance to it, or some other kind of movement. And so I wrote a series of pieces of music that were pretty challenging, and challenging to the degree that every performance that we did, because it was a little touring production, probably at least half the audience didn't come back after the interval. And I think it was
Whoa.
largely because the music was quite A, very loud, and B, yeah, very challenging. But the director loved it, and Polly came to one of the shows and she loved it. And she loved it so much that she then approached me and said, "I love that music. Can you write me an album with music like that, and I can try and put words to it?" So that was how the collaboration came about.
Wow, that's really, really cool. And it's kind of though. I'm going dance hall at Louse Point. It's not that it's challenging, it's just very different that you kind of need to wrap your head around it. I'm very curious to hear some of those early concerts, though, making the soundtrack music. I'd love to listen to one of those one day. Um, but as well, we've been mentioning soundtracks, and I'd love to just shine a light on the incredible work you've done as a soundtrack artist. First of all, with Before the Dawn of the Millennium, you released your first soundtrack as a solo artist, Rosie. How did you get was this the same soundtrack that you're talking about Dance Hall at Louse Point, or was this kind? How did you get involved with
This
this?
was a little bit later. I mean, not that much later. Obviously, it was the same decade, but it was a couple of years later. But it sprung from Dancehall at Louse Point, um, because the director, a Belgian woman called Patrice Toy, who made the film Rosie, she had been using, when she was putting the film together, I mean, directors usually often have like a piece of what they call temp music, so they like pick a piece of music that they like just to put in scenes, just so that you've got an idea of what a scene might be like with music. And she had been using the first piece, a little instrumental piece called Girl, which is the piece that opens the Dancehall at Last Point album. She'd been using that music as part of her temp music, and she really loved it. And so she got in touch with me, which was a bit more difficult in those days. There was kind of pre-internet, or it was pre everybody having access to the internet anyway. And so I think it was sort of like a letter to the record company that got passed on to sort of Polly's manager, and eventually ended up as a fax to the hotel that I happened to be staying in, because I was producing something over in America at the time. And I just got this fax saying a Belgian director would like to talk to you about doing some film music. It's like, okay, that sounds cool. So we had a chat, got on well. She came over to Bristol, and I played her some of the instrumental music that I was writing at the time. She really liked it, and that was how the Rosie score came about. And excuse me, since that time, I've made 4 films with the same with Patrice, and I'm just working at the moment on a 5th one right now. So, we've had a long, good collaborative career together, which has been great.
That's really, really cool. And I'm actually very excited to hear that soundtrack for this fifth film that you've been talking about. And just as kind of a thing that I know there are differences, so I wouldn't want you thinking that I don't think there are, but I know there are differences between composing an album and soundtrack. But could you tell us kind of how do you change your approach when writing an album and writing a soundtrack?
I mean, sometimes at the beginning, there is no difference. It's almost the same thing. It's uh, as things get closer to completion, you start to hone the bits. Okay, if this is, because sometimes I write a piece of music and I don't really know where it's going to end up, because it's not like everything I write for a soundtrack. Sometimes I write a lot of soundtrack music before there's even a film there, and then a film appears, and I think, well, I've got a few things here, and you try some of the bits, and some things seem to just, wow, that fits really, really well. Like, for instance, the main theme to Rosie, I'd written before Patrice had even asked me, before we'd ever met, before I had any idea I was going to write any film music. It was just a piece of music that I wrote. And when I played Patrice, I played her a couple of things just to say, oh, this is the kind of thing I've been writing. The first time she heard it, she just said, that is the main theme to the film. And so sometimes it works like that, so there's no difference. Obviously, occasionally, once you get into working, when the nitty gritty of the film, there'll be certain scenes where, okay, this scene needs some music, it needs to start here, it needs to finish there, so you have to be a little bit more precise about about how things are going to go. And I'm also very much aware that it's a part of something else. It doesn't have to stand by itself, and sometimes you want something that's unobtrusive, because you want it to be supporting the film, rather than things I don't like about film music. A lot of film music I don't like prescriptive film music, when like there's a like a bit of really spooky music or something spooky's happening, or a bit of like really loud stab. I don't like being told what to think by film music. I prefer it to be a little bit more subtle than that. So it's setting an atmosphere rather than here's the funny bit, here's the scary bit, etc., etc.
Well, I think you achieved that very, very well because, as I mentioned, one of my favorite albums that you've done, which is soundtrack, which is She a Chinese. I was looking at the album cover and I was listening to the music going, what is this actually about? Like, and I didn't search it up because I just thought it'll just be something that I'll think about and then I'll Google it and I'll go, yeah, that's very different to what I thought. So that's really, really cool though. And I totally agree that film music should be it should be for both worlds. It should work with the film and it should be a standalone project, but not taking away from either in the process. So now finishing off speaking about your soundtracks, I'd love to discuss, as we mentioned earlier, your collaboration and production of the music of Mark Oliver Everett, aka E of EELS, who are a fantastic group. EELS Time, their new record is fantastic and it is linked down below if you want to have a listen, as well as the interview. And please do after you listen to this one. Could you tell us how you first met Mark? How that whole uh that whole journey began?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite funny, really, because we initially we were supposed to meet in LA in the I can't remember 1997, I think, because we were both signed to the same publisher, and I was in LA to write some songs, and I've been to it's kind of the publishers had set up a couple of meetings for me, and they said, "Oh, this writer really wants to write with you. It's going to be great." And I sort of show up, and the writer had never heard of me, and I realized, okay, they've obviously said the same thing to the writer. Oh, John Parish is coming. He really wants to write with you. So there were a couple of those things, and the only person I'd heard of that they'd set me up to write with was Mark, and I thought, oh, you know what, I really like. This was after the sort of the first Eels album had come out, um, and so I was like, oh, I really like Eels. So I don't want to just have one of these embarrassing situations where he doesn't know who the hell I am. So I blew out the meeting. I didn't go to it.
Oh,
And about probably a year, or 9 or 10 months or a year later, we both Eels and PJ Harvey happened to be on the same episode of Top of the Pops. And so, so we met at the Top of the Pop studio.
casually says that. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
we
I
just met at the top of the pop
know.
studio, you know.
I know. It seems ridiculous. So that's where we met, and so he said to me, "Ah, how come you blew out that writing session with me? I was really looking forward to that." And so it's like, "Oh, were you? I thought you probably never heard of me." And he says, "No, no, it was." And so we had a laugh about it, and explained about it, and then he said, oh, maybe we'll try and do something some other time. And then a little bit later, he just called me up and said, I'm writing a new album. Do you want to come over and try and do a couple of songs together? So I went over for a week or so, and we wrote the first track, Dogface Boy, which is the first track on the Souljacker album, and and then as a result of that, I then went back, came back to Bristol, wrote a few more songs, sent them over to E. He put some words to them, and then eventually we got together and recorded the album pretty fast. I think we did the whole thing in about 3 weeks, including writing. Another probably the other half of it. So.
Wow, that is very, very quick. And also, I just want to say, and I know this is completely, well, sorry, it's slightly on topic, but it's slightly not as well. For anybody who's listening and is an Eels fan, I've never got to share one of my favorites. I'm not going to say favorite because that's it's a bit restrictive, but one of my favorite Eel tracks, and I'm gonna have it linked down below, is "I Like Birds." And I just think it's one of just the simplest and coolest songs ever. I heard it on the John Creedon show on RT Radio 1, and it's just fantastic. So links down below. Sorry, John, just to
Yeah, no,
interrupt the
it-
interview for
yeah,
2 minutes.
it's a great song, and you know, we played it live a lot when on the tour that I was playing guitar, and I loved playing it. It was great.
It's kind of quirky, but it has a very straightforward message to it, so
Yeah.
it's quite accessible. Um, And then as well, we've been speaking about soundtracks and everything. So we've spoke a bit about your solo career, but we haven't spoken about nearly a solo album, your kind of debut album on its own. And I'd love to speak about How Animals Move. How did you find focusing on your own creativity as a solo artist and making your own music, going from producing and playing with all these groups and maybe contributing to their ideas? How did you find focusing in on your own ideas and developing them for the LP?
Um, that album came about because I started working on it very shortly after the birth of my first daughter, Anna, and so I took some time off touring and doing and working, so I was staying at home for a while because I wanted to be around, you know, to help my wife Michelle and you know I just wanted to be there because it's really exciting, and but I still wanted to play music, so I thought, you know, what I'm going to do, I'm going to arrange like one night a week. You know, I'll invite all my friends from Bristol, you know, that play in various different bands and things, and we'll meet up at this little studio and we'll have a couple of beers and we'll just play some music. And so I did. So I called a few people and everyone was like, "Yeah, I'd love to do that." And then when we all got in the room, they were like, "What are we going to play there?" And so it was like, "Oh yeah, I guess somebody has to come up with some ideas." So I started writing some pieces for this particular group, which was like about 10 or 11 people when we started, which was fantastic. And so I almost like had a it was almost like having an orchestra to play with. It was really great. So I just started writing music for this band, and almost as soon as we started playing, I don't know, we started getting offers for, like, you know, to do a show or something like that. So what started off as, you know, what I intended to be just a kind of a, you know, a weekly get together with some friends to have a drink and, you know, have a bit of a jam, ended up becoming my band, you know, inadvertently. and and so, you know, we recorded, you know, the How Animals Move album, and and I sent it around to, well, I didn't send it around to very many labels. I sent it to one label, Thrill Jockey in Chicago, because I really liked that label, and they really liked it, and so they put it out, and they put out all my solo albums ever since.
I just think that's really, really, that just speaks on a whole new level of creativity. Yeah, we're only doing it once a week. We're just hanging out, playing music. We're now touring. Damn it.
Yeah.
The fact that it happens casually without any force says a lot about your creative process and
There's
your
been
career
that's
as an
been
artist.
pretty much how my career has gone. It's kind of good things have happened, and I've just sort of gone with them. You know.
I think that's a good thing though, speaking about your talent as a musician. Um, and then as well, 2009. So we're jumping quite a bit forward now for A Woman a Man Walked By, which was your second collaboration with Polly, that it was now going from Dancehall at Louse Point. You were now making a new record with her. How did you find kind of collaborating and coming back? Because you were doing all these new things for quite a long time. How did you find coming back to that just familiar collaboration and making that record? How did you find that whole experience?
I mean, it was pretty natural, really, because, you know, me and Polly have had such a long working relationship. You know, either her being in my band, mostly me being in her band, but also, you know, the collaborative stuff as well. And we've always run ideas past each other, you know, and so in many ways it felt very natural, you know, and it came about. That one came about because there was the song "Black Hearted Love," which is the first song on record. Was actually written quite a long time before the rest of the album, and it was something that kind of done, I don't know, in the early 2000s, a few, for a good 5 years before the record, maybe more than that. And it was a demo just almost by itself that we'd kind of done. And because there was nothing to hang it to at the time, we'd almost forgotten about it. And I think Polly discovered it, found it on a cassette and like phoned me up one day and said, like, I just kind of rediscovered this cassette. It's got this fantastic song on it called Black Hearted Love, like we must do another album. And so that was how that album came about. And it was so, similar in the way that kind of Dancehall at Loud's Point was recorded around the same time as To Bring You My Love. um, A Woman and Man Walk By was done similar time to White Chalk. So we were working on a PJ Harvey album, and at the same time, Polly was writing words for music that I'd already written for because she tends the way both of our collaboration are very much I write the music, and then Polly takes the music and writes the words. So she likes to have everything first, and then puts the words on top of it. On top of it.
Fair enough. And I really loved the way your collaboration as two musicians started off with the cassette, and it's still cassettes were still part of the circle. Even in 2009, everybody was buying files off the internet for music. Cassettes were still what was
Yeah, yeah.
making the music at the time, which is really, really cool. And 2 years later, you mentioned they're working on a record, White Chalk. Then as well, you guys worked on Let England Shake. So, as one of the producers, that was Mercury Prize winning. As one of the producers, how did you feel kind of seeing this win such a fantastic prize, the Mercury Prize? You must have been really not shocked because Polly is such an incredible musician, but you must have been very, very proud of the work that you had done on the record.
Yeah. It's really gratifying to have, like it's really easy to criticize awards, and because they often seem to go to things that maybe are not totally deserving. There's always a reason why something wins, and sometimes the Mercury Prize is often picked. So often pick some really great records, I think, and it is the most interesting, the most interesting music prize in the UK, I would say. So it was really not. It was very gratifying to have the record recognised like that. We thought it was a great record when we were making it, and I remember that it was actually when Polly started talking about she was going to write an album of sort of war songs, and this was when we were actually mixing the Woman and Man Walk By album. I think it's when she first mentioned it to me, and I was like, that's going to be difficult, I can't, I'm kind of curious to see whether you can pull this one off. But as soon as I heard the first demos, I was like, oh man, this is going to be great.
It works.
It totally works. And when we were recording the record, we were kind of like knew it sounded different again, like which is Polly's greatest strength, is that she always manages to do something different, with every record, which is amazing. And so we knew it was different, and we felt it was great. But you don't really know what other people are going to think of something until you put it out. So when it came out and the reviews started coming in and everything was like fantastic, it was like, okay, this is great. Everybody else thinks the same as we do about it. And then winning the prize was, it was just the icing on top of the cake, I guess.
Yeah, it was cool for me though as a fan looking back to see that Polly and you guys won such a fantastic prize for that album because it was it as you mentioned there was war songs. Those albums really make an impact on people, and it's still really cool to see in this modern age albums that are impactful and important to people getting those prizes as you mentioned. And I'd love to speak to Polly someday about all this music. But coming back to your soundtrack for the last time, I promise we've mentioned it a lot. But in 2013, as you mentioned, Trail Jockey, who you were working at the label, released Screenplay, a collection of your film music. What was it like, kind of rediscovering parts of your old catalog to make this record possible?
Yeah, I think that was. That was great. Actually, I really enjoyed putting that album together. That was really interesting for me. I think at that time I'd done sort of several soundtracks that I hadn't released as independent, the original soundtrack to this film or whatever. And I just felt, oh, I'm building up a body of kind of pretty interesting soundtrack music, and maybe the best way of putting it out would be to do a collection of, so you a collection of music, so you wouldn't necessarily have had to see the film to go out and think, oh, I want to go and buy the music to that film. It would just be, I felt that it was more music that you didn't need to have seen the film to appreciate. And so yeah, I just sequenced it. I used bits of dialogue from the films in order to give, because I like that when I hear it on other soundtrack albums. And yeah, it was a really nice experience putting that together. And we toured it as well with my band, which was great, with showing sort of bits and pieces of the film as
Oh, that's cool.
behind us. So it was a great project, really really cool project.
It was honestly frightening for me though. Kind of what I was walking home from school today, listening to parts of it, and I was hearing bits of dialogue, and I was going, I thought this was a compilation. I was only trying to comprehend the last soundtrack, and now I've got to deal with like a mix up of dialogue, and in
Yeah,
foreign languages too.
yeah, yeah. Most there hasn't been that many films I've done that have been in English, I have to say.
Which was a bit of a struggle for me listening to that compilation. But I'd love to actually talk to you before my one of my final questions. I'd love to chat to you about obviously one of my favorite groups. I got to see them live in a cathedral, which was equally scary in a good way and also eye-opening, and I got to buy one of their records there. And I- I've spoke to Kate Stables of This Is the Kit, an incredible group. And obviously, you produced the first record. I believe actually we spoke about your work with Kate in the interview with Kate. So if you want to listen to that, listener, it will be linked down below. Um, but you reunited with This Is the Kit to produce Moonshine Freeze. How did you kind of come back to This Is the Kid? How did you find working with them for the second time on that record?
That was great, because obviously, I mean, I've stayed friends with Kate, throughout from when I first, met her. And I was delighted when because obviously when we made the first record, they hadn't really didn't really even exist as a band at that time. So it was really nice to sort of see it blossom and grow to become a really successful, and and she's such a great songwriter, such a brilliant singer. She was a brilliant singer anyway, right at the beginning. I loved her
Yeah.
from the start. Um, so it was great to be asked to come and do another record, and I really really enjoyed working on Moonshine Freeze. I think it's a great album, and yeah, yeah, and it would I wouldn't surprise me if we cross paths again, and certainly there's one of the other musicians that works with Kate, Jesse, who's part of the This Is the Kit. He's got a new album just coming out under the name of Morning Star, which was his original band, which I've also been involved with, which I mixed. So I'm still, I see them regularly, and I think of them all as good friends, and I'm a big fan.
Your work with This the Kid isn't coincidental. It's like and also speaking of mixing, one of my final kind of questions about your career is you mixed, and oh my God, I have been absolutely stunned by the singles for Forever Howling by Black Country New Road with Besties and Happy Birthday. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Besties is at the top of my Spotify Wrapped, but you mixed live at Bush Hall. Um how did you get involved? How did you meet Black Country New Road? Because they're slightly different to any other bands or artists that you were kind of producing at the time. Like Black Country New Road are a genre of their own. Like
They are.
they're another being, like another entity. So how did you get involved working with them?
Um, I don't remember now. No, who was it approached me? Probably somebody from the management. Either the management or the label got in touch and so just asked me if I would be interested in doing something with them. And I said, for sure, definitely. They were doing these. They were doing these series of shows at Bush Hall that they wanted to record, and so that became the thing that I would work on would be to do the mix. So I went to one of the concerts and had a chat with them at the show about. I had a couple of concerns about the live recording just because of live recording is quite, in a small venue can be quite tricky because you get such a lot of sound bleed, and I wanted to make sure that it was going to be possible to mix, to sort of, to get the vocals in a place where I would like them to be for a record, because obviously it's different between being a live show and listening to a record. A live show, you accept that sometimes you're not going to hear all the words, but
Yeah.
you're going to be caught up in the energy of the thing, and that will be fine. Whereas if you're listening to it as a record, it's a different thing. So I went to the show to make sure that the recording was going to be okay, which it was. In general, there's a couple of tricky technical issues to sort out, which is
There
fine.
always will be.
There always will be. And then they all came down to Bristol to sit in on the mix, and it was great. Really great bunch of people, and great band, and I really enjoyed mixing the record. I think it's great.
Yeah, it was cool though to see you work with the group, especially because I'm only starting to get into them now. And I will say, from listening to the singles, um, the link to Forever How Long will be down below the record. I believe that's the name, anyways. If I mix it up, I'm very sorry to all the Black Country New Road fans out there. I'm still getting into the group, guys. But from listening to the music, because that's what matters, not names, the music. I learned that with Automatic Lamini. It's not the names or anything. Um, what I will say is about that record is it's going to be one of the best albums of this year, from what I've been hearing with the singles. So definitely check it out. And I ace that pronunciation of Automatic Lamini as well. So I'm happy in it.
You totally
I'm
nailed it. Yeah.
happy out. So there's a bit of a lesson there. It's not the words, it's the music, guys. Um, but now as my last question, John, I'd like to ask you, um, one of the most difficult questions for a lot of people on the podcast. What music have you been listening to recently?
Okay. You see, it is a difficult one because
Yeah.
what I've been listening to most recently, almost exclusively, is demos by different artists who I may or may not work with.
Oh.
so, because I get sent a lot. I get sent a lot of things to listen to consider as possible projects, and so it takes up a lot. Takes up a lot of time, and I feel that's a privilege to get to hear music in that stage from really interesting artists, and but sometimes it's a bit exhausting, and sometimes I feel like I can't hear much. I don't hear enough music that I'm not either working on or potentially going to be working on, and I would like to, sometimes I'd like to have a little bit more time to do that. So really it's been, certainly over the last month while I've been touring, and even in the couple of days since I've been home, it is, I think, exclusively I've been listening to things that I might work on, because there's just been so much stuff, and I can't really talk about those because I'll tell you what I can talk. I talk about the new Aldous Harding demos, because that's the next record I will be working on, and so I've been listening to her demos and thinking about how we're going to be working on them in the studio, and they sound really great. And I'm very excited about this forthcoming album, which will be at least a year away before it comes out, but we will be starting work on it very, very soon.
Well, that's cool. You may not have been listening to much music, and I can totally get that. But listener, there is tons there. Listen to Eels, listen to PJ Harvey, listen to John Soundtracks, his solo work. We didn't even speak about Bird Dog Dante, but also check out that as well. Check out Black Country New Road. Check out This is the Kid, Thrill Jockey, and everything in between. All linked down below. Obviously, the PJ Harvey demos and collaborations with John as well. But we've covered a lot, John. I'm slightly tired now. I'm a bit, but it was a fun interview, and I want to thank you. And oh, and also listen to the Automatic Lamini records as well. Links all down below. But sorry to interrupt, John. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
It was a
I
pleasure.
really appreciate it. It's been a
Absolute pleasure.
great time. It's been a great time, um, to be chatting to you with. Oh God, your fantastic career. So thanks so much for joining me here.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, John.
Okay.
Bye.
You take care. Bye bye.